This story happened to me several years ago, around 2001, when I was working night shifts at a service station located on a highway on the outskirts of Houston, Texas. I always drove to work, and the gas station was in the middle of nowhere, just the highway and wilderness around. Although I worked the night shift, we did get quite a few customers, mostly truck drivers and regular cars stopping to refuel, grab some food, or use the restroom. So, I never felt alone. That night, I was serving a customer some snacks when a man entered. He appeared to be around 35 years old, very tall and burly. He walked to the back aisles where the refrigerators were, seemingly choosing a drink. After finishing up with the previous customer who then left, it was just the new guy and me left in the station. I was waiting to charge him, but as soon as the previous customer left, he turned and stared at me from the end of the aisle with eyes full of anger and a small cynical smile. I asked him in English what was wrong. He slowly started walking towards the counter where I was standing, never taking his eyes off me. As he got closer, I could see his hands were covered in blood and there were splashes on his face. He kept moving slowly towards me, and I started to back away, understanding that his intentions were not good and that he meant to harm me. I reached the door and ran out towards my car, but the man had slashed the tires. Back then, it wasn't common to have a mobile phone, so I didn't have one. Any necessary calls had to be made from the store's phone. I didn't know what to do. I just prayed that a car would come to refuel and someone could help me, but no one was passing by. At that moment, I saw the man coming out of the store heading towards me, still staring directly at me with that mocking smile as if he were stalking me. I ran to the back of the gas station, hoping the back door would be open so I could enter and call the police, but I had locked it with a padlock a few hours earlier. As I turned the corner to return to the front, I encountered the lifeless body of a man, completely naked. I was shocked and screamed louder than I ever had in my life. Turning around to see where the man was, I had lost sight of him. I walked stealthily towards the front of the store to see if he was there, but it was empty. So, I gathered my courage, ran to the door, entered quickly, and made sure the man wasn't inside. Luckily, he wasn't there, so I quickly locked the main door and rushed to the phone to call the police, but the man had cut the phone wires. I was lost. I had no choice but to wait for someone to come and help me. I peeked through the large store window, and suddenly, there he was, standing about 4 meters from the entrance, watching me intently, and his smile growing larger. It was clear he was enjoying the chase and having me cornered, unable to call for help. We stayed like this for about half an hour. I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to leave, to run away, but I was trapped. It seemed intentional that no one was coming to the store, even though few cars passed by the highway. I was locked in the store, wondering if I would survive. Fed up with being unable to do anything, I decided to grab a pair of scissors we had at the register and try to run as fast as possible, knowing that the man would end my life anyway. I had to fight. So, I gathered my courage, opened the door, and the man looked at me and smiled with a huge, horrifying grin, showing his yellow, almost rotten teeth, without taking his eyes off me. I took a step slowly just to see what he would do, and the man walked 2 steps towards me. It was clear he was enjoying this. At that moment, I froze, not knowing how to react, and decided to go back into the store and lock myself in. The man began walking forward, ending up just 2 steps from the store door. I couldn't stand this psychological game any longer. I yelled at him, asking what he wanted from me, but I only received a sinister smile in return. The man pulled out a giant knife and began scratching the glass of the door with it, liking to play with my mind and disturb me before ending my life. I stood at the back, nerves shattered, holding those small scissors for defense in case he entered, even though I knew it would be completely useless because the man was almost twice my size and had a sharp weapon. I had no chance against him. It was clear from miles away that he was a psychopath, and this was not the first time he had taken a life. At that moment, I saw a car park at the fuel pumps. A man got out of the car and started walking towards the store to buy gas. The man turned to look at him, and I tried to alert the gentleman by shouting at the top of my lungs not to come closer, to run away. But when the gentleman saw me, it was too late. When he tried to run, the man caught up with him, and you can imagine what he did with that knife. I was left in a state of shock, witnessing that. I couldn't move. I just watched the man drag the gentleman's body to the back of the store. I know I should have run at that moment, but I couldn't. My body did not respond. I was petrified. Tears streamed from my eyes, but I couldn't move, I just watched. Then, the man went for the gentleman's car and parked it next to mine, also slashing its tires. After that, he returned to standing in front of the store, stalking me, and his smile grew larger and larger, his eyes piercing, showing nothing but pure evil. There was no soul, nothing, just malice. I started reacting little by little, and finally, I could move. I knew I had to fight for my life or end up like those two people. So, I made the decision to run out the back door. I knew that when he saw me heading that way, he would do the same, so I had to be as fast as possible. I took the scissors and ran out without thinking twice. I opened the door and ran as fast as I could towards the woods. I heard the man running with his giant steps behind me. I can't explain the terror and adrenaline I felt at that moment. The man was hunting me like a predator chasing its prey. I kept running until I reached the highway, and the man was only 2 steps behind me when suddenly I saw lights in the distance. They were the sirens of a patrol car. Suddenly I stopped hearing the man's footsteps. I turned around, and he was gone, lost among the woods. I continued running, signaling to the patrol car until they finally saw me and stopped. I told them everything as best as I could, since my English wasn't very good. They took me to the station in the patrol car. I was still terrified and didn't want to get out, so I stayed in the car while they searched but found no sign of the man, only the bodies he had left behind. They called for reinforcements, and soon there were more police cars and ambulances at the scene. They took me to give my statement, and they showed me a photo, asking if the person in the photo was the man who had done all this. I confirmed that it was him. They told me he was an inmate who had escaped from a nearby asylum, and that they had been searching for him along that highway. They said he was very dangerous, a psychopath lacking empathy who enjoyed hunting his victims. I broke down crying, still unable to believe that I had survived, that he had been 2 steps away from catching me if not for that patrol car. I went home with severe trauma. 2 days later, I found out that they had caught him and put him in a maximum security prison. But still, I continued to dream about him every night. I saw him standing outside my house, stalking me. I went to therapy for several years, and it helped a lot. But this is something that has marked me for life without a doubt. I will never be able to get over it. I know my story isn't about ghosts, but believe me, the living are much more dangerous than the dead. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gustavo. I used to work at a gas station on the outskirts of my city, covering the night shift because I attended university during the day. The station was isolated, several kilometers away from any other structure, surrounded only by wilderness. It was usually very quiet there. At night, we barely had any customers, sometimes no more than 5 throughout the entire night. This was perfect for me as it allowed me to complete my homework with few distractions, and I was never afraid of being there alone. However, one night everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. I was finishing up some school notes with my headphones on when a woman walked in. She appeared well-dressed and elegant, walking towards the back of the aisle. Through the security mirror, I could see her stop and just stare out, doing absolutely nothing. I took off my headphones, ready to assist her when she came to the register to pay. But she stayed in that same spot for several minutes, which was quite odd. Feeling a bit uneasy, I approached her to ask if she needed any help. but she did not respond. At this point, I sensed something was off. So, I stepped out from behind the counter and walked towards her. She was still at the back looking outside, and what struck me was that she was barefoot. Her feet looked dirty and had some wounds. It was bizarre because, as I mentioned earlier, her dress and overall appearance were neat and elegant. I asked again if she needed help with something, but once more there was no response. I walked away to look outside to see if perhaps someone else was with her, but there was no one. No cars were parked. It was completely desolate. I began to wonder how she could have walked to the station. It was a 30-minute drive from the city. This situation was becoming unsettling, so I asked her once more how she had arrived there and if someone had dropped her off. Again, she did not answer. I started to get very nervous. I wasn't prepared for this kind of situation, so I told her that she needed to leave if she wasn't going to buy anything. For the first time, she turned to look at me, her eyes full of fear, and whispered, "It's coming for me." I asked her who was coming, if I should call the police, but she just started to cry uncontrollably, staring outside with an inexplicable terror. I quickly locked the door and called emergency services, telling them what was happening. The operator said they would send a patrol, but it would take at least 20 minutes as the station was quite remote from the city. I hung up and assured the woman that help was on the way. I continued to monitor the doors and check the surveillance cameras, thinking that perhaps someone was trying to abduct her or was after her. To be honest, my mind raced with various scenarios. I picked up a baseball bat that I always kept nearby for self-defense. Working there at night, one could encounter anything from robberies to drunken brawls. I gathered some courage and went outside to check around, but there was no one. Just the characteristic hum of a desolate night, complete silence. I returned inside, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. I searched the storage room, the bathrooms, everywhere, but she was gone. It was impossible that she could have left without me noticing. I had only glanced away for a few seconds. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to review the surveillance footage to see where she could have gone. What I saw next left me frozen. There was a figure in a black cloak, faceless, body unseen, standing exactly where the woman had been at the back of the aisle. This figure had been there from the moment she entered the store and was still there when I checked outside. I had passed right next to it without seeing anything. As soon as I went to the back of the store to check, the shadowy figure drifted away and vanished into the darkness. I saved the video to show the police, as what I witnessed was difficult to explain and even harder to believe. Just then, a patrol car arrived, which was odd because it had only been 5 minutes since they told me they were coming. The officers entered and inquired about the situation after receiving an alert. I asked how they arrived so quickly, to which they replied that they had been close by due to a severe accident that occurred just 2 kilometers away, where a woman had died. At that moment, I didn't think much of it, and just explained what had happened and showed them the video. They said they would look around the store but couldn't do much if the woman wasn't there to testify, and if no robbery or other incident had occurred, they really couldn't take further action. They inspected the area but found nothing. They advised me to lock the door and not hesitate to call emergency services if anything else happened. After that, they left. The rest of the night passed without incident until my shift ended in the morning, and I left the place. When I got home, I showered and lay down to rest a bit before going to school. I picked up my cell phone to check my social media, and that's when I saw it. The news of the accident from that night. A terrible crash between a car and a trailer had taken the life of the woman driving the car, just minutes after the accident. The paramedics could do nothing for her. When I saw her photo, I felt a chill run through my body. It was the woman who had come to the store that night, just minutes after her supposed death. I couldn't help but think that the figure outside the store was death itself, coming for her, and she was hiding, trying to fight for her life. Unfortunately, she lost the battle. This event is a true story that continues to give me nightmares to this day. My name is Alfonso, and in my youth I worked as a cashier at a gas station. I managed the service store there, which was open 24 hours. I worked the night shift, as I have always been a night person. This gas station was situated at the entrance of a small village, about 40 minutes from the city where I lived. Many of the village people had become my friends, and I had developed a fondness for them since I had been working there for several months, and the locals were very warm. One night I arrived at work as usual, close to 10 p.m. Everything was quiet, and I was busy arranging in the refrigerators the soda cans that had arrived that day, when suddenly I heard footsteps in the back room, where the storage area was. I fell silent to see if the noise would repeat, or if I had imagined it, but then I heard them again, now louder. I stood up and walked towards that room at the end of a small hallway. I opened the door and turned on the light, checked the area but found no one. I continued arranging the cans when the footsteps sounded again, this time accompanied by children's laughter. I quickly got up and ran back to the storage room, but it was empty, so I went back to continue my work. Honestly, I was a bit confused because I was certain of what I had heard. Pretending to be brave, I continued with my tasks when suddenly a very loud thump was heard. It sounded as if someone had punched the storage room door with great force. This was too much for me. I stepped into the hallway and shouted, "Who's there? I'm going to call the police." But there was no response. By then, I thought it might be someone outside the storage room at the back trying to play a prank, even though the sounds seemed to come from inside. But I didn't want to let my imagination run wild. When I noticed no one replied, I could hear children's laughter mocking me, coming from inside that room. I had no doubts now. At that moment, a lady from the village entered. We knew each other and always chatted. She saw me standing at the hallway entrance, not moving, and asked what was happening. I turned to her and said, "Good evening, Mrs. Elena. You see, some very strange things have been going on." I told her what had happened, and she said, "Yes, I know very strange things happen here, and they will never stop because this place has a very dark history." I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me that right here 10 years ago there was a terrible event. Before it was a gas station, this place used to be the house of an ex-governor of the village, a very large home where he lived with his wife and their 2 children, a girl and a boy, both 7 years old, who were twins. The governor's wife was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She spent several months on medication and attending appointments with a psychiatrist in the city, but she continued living at home. They never wanted to admit her to a hospital until one night when the governor was away in another city for work. She, in a fit of nervous breakdown and victim of her own illness, took the lives of her 2 children. When her husband returned, he found the terrible scene. She was admitted to a psychiatric center since it was determined that due to her illness, she could not go to jail. For many years, that house was abandoned because no one wanted to buy it, despite it being very large and beautiful. Eventually, an entrepreneur bought the property to demolish it and build this store. Mrs. Elena also mentioned that I was not the only one who had heard things in this place. Other previous employees had told her about things that happened there, especially on the night shift. She said that when we first started chatting a long time ago, she did not want to tell me anything to not scare me, and so that I wouldn't get any ideas. But she knew that at some point, I too would experience these kinds of events here. She told me to always carry a rosary with me, and that when I heard things, to hold it tight and pray, and that if anything happened, I could come to her house for help since she lived very close. Mrs. Elena made her purchase and left. I didn't know what to think. I had never believed in ghosts or paranormal phenomena. I wasn't easily frightened, but how could I not believe Mrs. Elena's stories if I had heard those footsteps and that laughter myself? So, I decided not to be afraid and to keep myself busy to make the night go faster, so I started sweeping the store. It was already past 3 a.m. when I heard footsteps in the storage room again. After that, the door was banged 3 times, even harder. I walked towards the hallway, stared at the door, and saw the handle move as if someone inside was trying to open it. I ran and stopped all movement, but I didn't want to open it because I didn't know what I might encounter. In my mind, I thought, I must not let them know I am afraid. I have to deal with this. So I yelled, "Enough, go away," and everything went silent. For a moment there was no sound, but just as I was about to walk away, the power went out throughout the establishment. I ran to the front, grabbed a flashlight, and when I tried to go out to check the fuses, I realized I was locked in and couldn't get out. I tried my keys, but they didn't work. The door was completely jammed. That was when I felt a fear like never before. I went back to the hallway, shining the flashlight to see if anyone was there. I started knocking on the windows of the store to see if anyone could hear me, but it was useless. No one passed by at those hours. There were no houses nearby, only empty lots, and it was very rare for someone to come to the gas station at that hour. I knew I was trapped. There was no line on the phone, and my cell phone had no signal. I leaned against the door, watching the hallway with the flashlight, when I saw the door of the storage room open slowly with the characteristic creaking sound. After that, I heard the murmurs of small children accompanied by laughter. I closed my eyes tightly because I didn't want to see whatever was coming out of that room. I knew I couldn't handle it, and it might give me a heart attack. I was sweating cold, squeezing my eyes shut, and praying with the few prayers I knew, when suddenly I felt someone blow near my ear. I dropped the flashlight and ran screaming through the aisles of the store, yelling for them to leave me alone, trying to hide from whatever it was. I sat down in the dark in the last aisle of the store, resigned, waiting for whatever was there to find me. I heard small footsteps approaching the back aisle with those chilling laughs, when suddenly I felt something touch my hand, a very cold, small hand, and at the same time, another hand touched my shoulder from the other side, with those macabre laughs surrounding me. I kept my eyes closed. I never opened them, just screamed very loudly when I knew those children had found me. I thought this was it. They had caught me. Just then I heard someone knocking on the door from outside, and like a miracle the lights came back on. I opened my eyes. There was no one around. I got up immediately, still with tears in my eyes, and walked to the door where a truck driver was standing, waiting to get some gas and buy some cigarettes. I opened the door, and it opened as if nothing had happened. The man looked at me and asked if I was all right. I told him yes, thank you for coming. He looked puzzled and said he just wanted to buy some cigarettes but thought the place was closed because everything was off. But he saw my car parked, so he decided to knock. I thanked him again, made the sale, took my things, and closed the shop. I walked to Mrs. Elena's house, the woman who had told me the story about the children. I knocked on her door and apologized for the hour, but told her I had just experienced the most horrifying night of my life in that place. Mrs. Elena let me in and gave me a hug. She said she knew that sooner or later, something like this would happen to me, as most of the gas station's night shift employees quit soon after starting to work there. She thought it was due to my courage, since it seemed those souls liked to be feared. Many stories were told in the village. I waited for dawn and returned to the place just to hand in my resignation. I never went back to that gas station, nor did I find out what happened there or if it continued as a store. But whatever it was, those souls remained there, scaring anyone who dared to stay alone at night.